So in this video, we're going to talk about exactly which God we worship as Christians. Now, that might seem like an obvious answer. Everybody knows the God that Christians worship. However, in my observations, a lot of the language and identifiers about the God of Christianity is very vague, and it never actually puts its finger on exactly who we're worshiping when we say we're worshiping God. It's ambiguous at best, and if there's one thing that's really crippling to Christianity, it's ambiguity. The God that Christians worship, we're going to answer this question very simply and straightforwardly, and we're going to get at it by answering the question, who did Jesus pray to? When Jesus would pray, the several times in the New Testament texts where we see Jesus praying, or in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus is praying, who is he praying to? Which God is he praying to? Now, we might not know how to answer that question right up front because if we're not well versed in the scriptures, we wouldn't have a clue. So we're going to answer that question based on the identity of Jesus in relation to this God that we worship, which is a really good way of answering the question because it links our answer to who God is to Jesus of Nazareth. Whoever our God is the God Jesus prayed to. Now, we look to Jesus because he was raised from the dead, which means we're going to listen to that guy. If there's any guy that we should listen to, it's Jesus because God raised him from the dead. Who is this God that Jesus prayed to? Well, we're going to answer this question with the help of the Apostles' Creed, which is a really good place for us to go. The Creed gives us a blueprint for how to answer this question. So how does the Apostles' Creed answer the question or get it an answer? It starts by identifying the God that sent Jesus, the God that finally raised Jesus from the dead, that God is the God who created all things in the beginning. He is the Almighty. That's a really great word to use for God. It means the buck stops with this God. He works life and death and all things, as Hannah says in her song. And in various other places, the scriptures testify to the fact that the God who creates all things is almighty. That means he does everything. All things flow from him and to him and in him and through him. He is in charge of everything. Now, if we work a little bit further into the history of God's salvation, we learn that this isn't just the God who created everything. He is that. That's a big deal. But he's also the God who is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is an important identifier for us as Christians because it gives us a really major jumping off point from other religious accounts like, say, Islam, where Islam's account of religion runs through Ishmael rather than Isaac. We as Christians, along with our Hebrew counterparts, identify, no, the God of creation, the God of Abraham worked through Isaac, not Ishmael. Now, that's not the most significant jumping off point for a differentiation between Christianity and Islam, but it is a major one. So we are the people, the God that we worship is the God who created everything. He is the Almighty. He makes and delivers all things. He works life and death and everything. He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is the God of the prophets, right? Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Hosea, all those prophets. He is the God who sent Jesus of Nazareth, who is the Christ of Israel, to earth, right? So now we start learning about the relation from the Creed between God and this Jesus. Now, because of Jesus, we are identifying this God as the Father. I believe in God, the Father, the Almighty, the maker of the heavens and the earth, right? Now we have a very, very concrete identifier as to who this God is. Now this helps us because we shouldn't assume these things, right? This is a very important identifier for our God that we hold in our hands and that we hold in our minds, especially now as Christianity is losing its foothold in the Western world. We can't just assume that we're all talking about the same God. And we can't assume that even in Christian denominations we're talking about the same God, which is why we have to be very exact and precise, very concrete, very clear and transparent about exactly how we identify our God as Christians.